Hey, what's going on? Welcome to the Podcast Accelerator, the thrice-weekly show that brings you podcast education, industry insights, and straight-talking reactions to podcasting news. I am your host, Mark Asquith, that British podcast guy and CEO and co-founder here at Rebel-Based Media, the tech company that brings you the Podcast Success Academy, podcast websites, Productivity, Rebel-Based Studios, and Captivate.fm, the world's only growth-oriented podcast host, where you can get your first month of podcast hosting for just $1, and of course transfer in any other podcast that you've already got out there in the wild completely for free. Now today, here on the Podcast Accelerator, I'm going to talk about how to keep your subscribers when you're changing your RSS feed. It's quite a big one, it's quite an important one, so we're going to dig into that in just one moment. But look, before I do that, I just want to tell you once more about AWeber. Now, it's really, really difficult to grow a brand. It is. I've grown a couple of them in the past. You know, I've been fortunate to be involved in not only my personal brand, but of course, Rebel-Based Media, podcast websites, Hacksaw, the agency that I used to own, and of course, right back through to when I was 23, 24 and first started out my first business. It's all about brand. Brand is so super important, and AWeber have been by my side for years to help me to build and engage with people from a brand perspective. And being a podcaster, branding is absolutely vital. It's at the core of what we do. And branding is not just your logo. It's actually how you make people feel. And what better way than to make people feel absolutely wanted and special? What better way to do that than by building a relationship with them via email? Well, that's what AWeber allow you to do. It's what they do for me every single day. So please go and check them out for 90 days completely for free at markasquith.com/AWeber. Right, this is a pretty big one. When we are branding or rebranding our podcast, it's vital to do two things to keep your subscribers. Number one is about your RSS feed. Number two is about your communication. So let's explore these two vital pieces of the podcast rebrand puzzle right now. Number one, your RSS feed. The way that this works, you know what an RSS feed is by now. If you're a podcaster, it's basically it's an XML file which is structured data, and what it does is it allows readers such as podcast apps, Apple Directory, Spotify Directory, Overcast, or any other podcast app out there on the market. It allows them to read this file, this XML file, and say, right, okay, here's an episode. It came out on this day. This is the audio file for it. These are the show notes for it. This is the title. This is the author. Go and play it. With all that data, go and play it. And that comes from your RSS feed. Now, the way that works is that essentially your feed is read verbatim. It's read exactly as you produce it. So if you log into your podcast host, such as Captivate.fm, and you type the title of your show as being the Podcast Accelerator, the directories and the people that subscribe to your show, they will see the title of Podcast Accelerator. Now, if I was to go and change that RSS feed today and change the title from the Podcast Accelerator to something else, click save on Captivate.fm's hosting, the podcast apps would see the new title, all right? They would see the new name of the show instantly, all right? It's not a big ordeal. It's not a big kind of process. There's no ceremony. I change the name and click update in Captivate or in my podcast host, and it's changed. Now, the reason that I'm saying that is that when it comes to rebranding your podcast, what a lot of people tend to do is they'll say, well, that's fine, I'll fire up a new RSS feed. That is not the right way to do it, because you need to keep the existing subscribers that you've got. So think about when I moved this from being the 7-Minute Mentor to the Podcast Accelerator, what I did was I went ahead and I took all of the content. I basically went into Captivate.fm and I took all of my content off this feed. But I kept this feed intact because you were subscribed to it as a 7-Minute Mentor. So Kipper, Felicia, Raf, you guys out there that were subscribed to the 7-Minute Mentor, I pulled the MP3 files and the show notes out of that file, out of that feed, and I put them on a brand new feed. So if you go and search now for the 7-Minute Mentor, you'll see that there's another feed inside Apple Podcasts and Spotify that's all those files on a brand new feed. So you can go and listen to them and subscribe to that feed if you want. And then what I did with the feed that you were already subscribed to, I just changed the name. And I uploaded the Podcast Accelerator cover art. I changed the name to the Podcast Accelerator. Then I started uploading files to this feed. Okay, so you essentially didn't have to resubscribe, and that is how you keep your subscribers. It's understanding RSS feeds. Now, if you need a hand with this, hit me up. If you're a Captivate user, hit me up on the support little chat bubble at the bottom right. If you're a Podcast Websites member, you need a hand with this, just hit me up via the support. Or, of course, the easiest place to do this is probably actually in the Podcast Success Academy forums. So if you're a member of our academy, head over to the forums. We can have a little chit-chat on this, because it is very, very important to get that right, okay? Now, if you want to ask a question, hit me up on Twitter at Mr. Asquith. Very, very happy to dive in. Now, in the Podcast Success Academy, we do have some courses on this. We do have some information on how to do this. So with some walkthroughs and some behind the scenes of how to do this on your podcast host, for example, with Captivate.fm. So that's your RSS feed out of the way. And we're going to talk a little bit more about RSS feeds on Friday. The second thing I want to just talk to you very quickly about is when it comes to keeping your subscribers, when you change your podcast, it's actually all about communications. The second bit is just about communications. So what I was doing when I changed this from being the 7-Minute Mentor to being the Podcast Accelerator, I very quickly started to tell people about it. So I tell you throughout the 7-Minute Mentor, look guys, on this day, I'm going to change from 7-Minute Mentor to the Podcast Accelerator. And I did that for about 2 months running up to this, so that people knew that on May the 1st, 2019, Podcast Accelerator would replace a 7-Minute Mentor. And to get the 7-Minute Mentor archives, you could go over and find it separately in Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So I was communicating. I emailed people. I told you on Twitter. I told you on LinkedIn and Instagram. I was really clear on what was happening and when it was happening. And that is the important thing. Here's why I'm doing this, guys. This is what you need to communicate. Here's why I'm doing this. Here's what you can expect and what you need to do, which is essentially nothing. And here's when it's going to happen, okay? What you need to do and when it's going to happen, okay? If you communicate those things and you're very, very open with it, you'll keep most of your subscribers. My download numbers have gone up since I started the Podcast Accelerator. They've gone up. So I've not lost anyone on the 7-Minute Mentor changing. I've not lost anyone on that. In fact, I had a mass set of downloads on the 7-Minute Mentor feed as well when I pushed that archive feed out there. So it's just about being communicative with people. So here's what you need to tell them, and you need to tell them upfront and regular. Give it a couple of months and tell them very, very regular throughout the 2 months prior to rebranding your podcast, all right? Tell them what you're doing. Why are you doing this? Why are you rebranding the podcast? What do they need to do to get the new content? Or what do they need to do if they want to access the old content? How do they go ahead and get that? And then number 3, when is this happening? When can they expect this to happen? All right. If you do that, you stand a really, really good chance of not losing any subscribers at all. Now, thank you so very much for joining me here on the Podcast Accelerator. I'm loving doing this show. Thank you to everyone that had such positive feedback on my bonus episode that I put out, which was Has Google Just Changed Podcast SEO Forever? Please go and check that out. It came out on the 14th of May. Go and check it out, please. That's a very, very important episode. And like I said, thank you so much for joining me on the Podcast Accelerator. Remember, if you know someone that is wanting to get into podcasting, if you know someone that is a podcaster, please tell them that this show is available to listen to completely for free in any app that supports podcasts. And if you're wondering what the best next step for your show is, whether you want to grow that audience, whether you're a veteran podcaster or a new podcaster, please go ahead and take our short 5-minute survey where I'm going to personally help you to diagnose and solve the main issue that is holding you and your show back. What is stopping you growing your podcast? And I'm going to give you not only the solution to that, because we've worked with thousands of podcasters for years, we have seen it before. I'm going to give you that solution, and I'm also going to give you access to our free, very, very vibrant Podcast Rebellion Facebook community, our weekly free group coaching, actionable and insider-only emails, and even a free invitation to the Podcast Success Academy. So please, go ahead and invest 5 minutes now to grow your podcast by heading to rebelbasemedia.io/grow. And until the next episode, thank you so much for joining me. And never forget, the more you expect from yourself, the more you will excel.